I'm facing a significant struggle and could use some advice and support from others. I'm a 49-year-old woman, and for this conversation, you can call me Jan. While my husband, who is 50, will be Jerry. These names aren't our real ones, and I plan to delete this account after posting to protect our privacy. Jerry and I have enjoyed a happy marriage for 27 years and have two wonderful children, a 26-year-old son and a 24-year-old daughter. He was my first love and remains the only man I've ever truly loved. We've been a couple for over 30 years, having started dating when I was 18. I fell head over heels in love with Jerry, and he proposed to me just 7 months into our relationship. I eagerly accepted and was ready to marry him right then and there. At that time, he was in his second year of college, and I was working at a local hardware store franchise in our hometown. Our plan was to remain engaged until he graduated and secured a job before tying the knot. I was perfectly fine with this, even though it meant waiting nearly 3 years to get married, because my love for Jerry was so deep, and I was excited about spending the rest of my life with him. The college he attended was located in the capital city of our state, a little over 2 hours from our hometown. Normally, he would come home nearly every weekend to be with me. However, there were occasional weekends when he stayed at school to study or due to bad weather. On those weekends, we'd spend hours on the phone, talking multiple times a day. Keep in mind, this happened about 30 years ago, so there were no smartphones, texting, or internet. We relied on good old-fashioned landline phones. It's funny, I feel so old reminiscing about this. Around a year into our engagement, I started feeling impatient and suggested we get married sooner instead of waiting another 2 years until he graduated. I explained how much I wanted to become his wife, expressing my concerns that he might meet someone else at school and leave me, which was probably just me projecting my fears. Jerry reassured me that he would never do such a thing and professed his love. He pointed out that waiting would allow us to make sure we were truly compatible and financially ready to start a family. Now, here's where I made a big mistake. There was this guy, let's call him Jim, who was an electrician and a regular customer at the hardware store, coming in for supplies 2, 3 times a week. We had a friendly rapport and exchanged pleasantries during his visits. Over time, he began flirting with me and making advances. I told him, "I'm sorry, but I'm engaged." Jim responded by saying he was engaged too, but he felt such a strong connection that he'd be willing to take a risk for one chance. This back-and-forth flirting continued for weeks. Then, one weekend, when Jerry unexpectedly informed me that he'd have to stay at school for the next 2 weekends, I made the regrettable decision to go out with Jim. We went on a couple of dates, and after our 3rd date, things escalated, and I ended up in his bed. We met at Jim's apartment 3 more times over the next 2 weeks while his fiancée was at work. I know what you're probably thinking about me right now, and I have to agree with you. I believe I temporarily lost my sense of judgment. However, as soon as Jerry returned home, I came back to my senses and immediately ended things with Jim. Jim was devastated and tearfully pleaded with me to elope and run away with him. Breaking his heart was something I hated doing, but I remained firm and told him that we needed to erase this from our lives. I made it clear that we were both engaged, and Jerry was the love of my life. Jim and I went our separate ways. He stopped coming to the store, and I haven't spoken to him in 29 years. 2 months later, he married his fiancée, let's call her Susie. Then 19 months later, I married Jerry. Since that time, we've had a happy marriage, and I genuinely mean that. We had a traditional marriage, with Jerry as the provider, protector, and an excellent father, while I took care of the family, managed the household, and was a devoted stay-at-home mom. We loved our lives, and had what most would consider an ideal marriage. However, all of this was shattered 3 days ago due to my carelessness. Now here's the backstory. Throughout my teenage years, and right up until a year before I married Jerry, I kept a detailed diary. When I moved out of my parents' house, I stored the diary in a cardboard box along with my yearbooks and other school mementos. We placed this box and similar ones filled with school memories in the basement of our new home. Those boxes remained in the same spot in our basement for more than 25 years without anyone touching them. Honestly, I completely forgot about the contents of those boxes, including the fact that my diary was in one of them. Then, This past Saturday, Jerry decided it was time to tidy up the basement and transfer everything from those boxes into plastic storage bins. He spent the entire morning cleaning down in the basement. When he finally came upstairs, he didn't say a word and headed down the hallway. I assumed he was just tired and was going to take a shower. He went into the bathroom and stayed there for a good 45 minutes. I checked on him, and he told me he was fine. Just reading. Little did I know, what he was actually reading was my diary, which he found in one of the boxes. After he emerged from the bathroom, he walked right up to me, holding the diary, and said, "Look what I found." His face was filled with disgust and anger like I had never seen before. He then opened the diary and began reading the pages where I had written about Jim. I immediately asked him to stop and assured him I could explain, but he continued to read. I started crying and begged him to please stop, but he kept reading, growing increasingly agitated and speaking louder as he read on. When he finished reading, I attempted to speak, but he interrupted me, saying, "Go pack a bag." I asked him why, and he replied firmly, "You're going to your parents." I didn't want to upset him further, so I went ahead and started packing. After I finished packing, I attempted to talk to him, but he simply said, "Leave." I pleaded with him, even going down on my knees, hugging his legs and begging, but he continued to insist, "Leave." By this point, his face had turned red and veins were bulging from his forehead. I had never witnessed him so furious. He has always been a composed and level-headed person. I left the house and drove to my parents' place. Once there, I explained what had transpired to them. They were taken aback and disappointed. My parents, both 81 years old, hold Jerry in high regard, considering him like a son. I clarified that what had occurred happened over 29 years ago, and I had remained faithful throughout our marriage. They were deeply upset, and the shock left them unable to speak. I made numerous calls and sent texts to Jerry throughout the night, but he never responded. The following morning, I received a call from my daughter, who began yelling at me, questioning how I could do such a thing to her dad. She mentioned that her father had a video call with her and her brother the previous night, during which he sent them a file containing the crucial pages from my diary. I felt embarrassed and tried to explain the situation to my daughter, but she wasn't receptive and hung up. I then attempted to reach our son, but he didn't answer my calls and disregarded my texts and voicemails. I also made numerous attempts to contact Jerry, but he remained unresponsive. I went back to our house and stayed there the entire afternoon, but he never returned. Eventually, I went back to my parents' house. A little after 4 p.m., I received a call from Jim's wife, Susie. Susie began using profanity, hurling terrible insults at me, and warned me to steer clear of her if I knew what was best for me. I attempted to engage in a conversation with her, but she too abruptly ended the call. Later that night, a good friend of mine called and informed me that Jerry was at a popular local bar, openly discussing the affair with everyone. I was devastated because this was entirely out of character for Jerry. My friend mentioned that he seemed intoxicated and not like his usual self, which greatly worried me because Jerry rarely ever drinks, typically having only 2 or 3 drinks in a year. I was extremely anxious and began calling and texting him repeatedly, but he remained unresponsive. I returned home and decided to wait for Jerry to come back. A little after 9 p.m., a friend of his dropped him off in our driveway. As soon as he entered the house, I embraced him tightly. Initially, he didn't respond, but eventually he started hugging me back and we began talking. I could smell alcohol on him, and he was in tears, questioning, "How could you do this to me?" I expressed my profound regret and explained that it had been a colossal mistake, emphasizing that it had occurred almost 30 years ago. He claimed that our life had been constructed upon a falsehood. He went on to berate himself, expressing anger at feeling simped by a loser of a man and a terrible wife. After making these remarks, he became highly agitated once more and instructed me to leave. I pleaded with him to let me stay, expressing my concern for his well-being. He calmly requested that I depart and allow him a week to contemplate matters before returning home. Despite my pleas for him to stay, I ultimately left in tears. During the following week, I sent him heartfelt daily texts expressing my profound remorse and love. But he never responded. According to information from several friends, Jerry and Susie were spotted multiple times going out for drinks during this period. I'm uncertain whether they were merely meeting to exchange information or if they were engaged in a retaliatory affair. All I can say is that I feel an overwhelming sense of guilt for what I did to Jerry. I learned that Susie kicked Jim out and was planning to divorce him. He is devastated and emotionally shattered. There have been rumors circulating that Susie has been involved in infidelity for years, and the person who informed me believes she might be using the diary as a pretext for divorce. Due to Jerry and Susie, nearly everyone in our town, which has a population of 3,600, now knows about the affair. Feedback I've received suggests that most people find Jim and me reprehensible, but feel that we should be forgiven since this all transpired nearly 30 years ago. For now, I'm staying at my parents' house, anticipating my return home next week to be with Jerry. I understand his pain, but I believe he's reacting excessively. I hope that over the next week he will come to his senses, and both of us can begin the healing process. What advice can you offer on how to best handle this situation? I acknowledge that my actions were terrible, but I believe Jerry has blown this out of proportion. The affair occurred almost 3 decades ago, and since then, we've had a wonderful marriage and family. He feels that our life was constructed on deceit, which I disagree with. What are your thoughts on this matter? Thank you for allowing me to share my feelings. Update. First and foremost, I want to express my gratitude to everyone for their valuable feedback. It has truly been beneficial. I've followed the advice of many by letting my husband take all the time he needs, assuring him that I'll be here when he's ready to have a conversation. It has been a few days, and I haven't received any word from him, but mutual friends have reported seeing him and mentioned that he appears to be doing well. I also want to emphasize that I have never reconnected with or had any contact with Jim since we put an end to our affair. Furthermore, I want to make it crystal clear that I have remained completely faithful throughout our entire marriage, and the thought of cheating on my husband has never crossed my mind, except for that regrettable 2-week period with Jim. Lastly, my relationship with my kids is strained at the moment, particularly with my daughter, who has been unkind. She unexpectedly decided to order ancestry kits for the family, and she called me with a hint of sarcasm, inquiring if there was anything I wished to disclose before proceeding with the order. I assured her that there was nothing to disclose and that I was looking forward to the results. That's all for now, and I'll provide another update next week once I'm back home. Update. I'm back in my house, but now my husband and I are legally separated and I'm absolutely devastated. When I returned home, Jerry handed me separation papers and informed me that he had relocated all my belongings to the spare bedroom. Additionally, he installed a keyed lock on our master bedroom to prevent my access. In our master bedroom, he's placed a small fridge, a food storage cupboard, and a coffee machine. At this point, I mainly see him when he's leaving for work or going out during the evenings. He's now handling all his cooking, cleaning, and laundry, and he's made it clear that we will be living as roommates without any commitments. He continues to meet with Susie and adamantly refuses to cease their interactions. Whenever I inquire about what's happening, he either ignores me or responds with, "I'm keeping a journal and I'll share it with you in 30 years. On several occasions when I attempted to initiate intimacy, he callously told me to go to Jim if I need something. I still can't fathom what's unfolded. It's as though he's discarded our love and developed resentment toward me. I feel utterly shattered. According to a close friend of mine, her husband disclosed that Jerry was at a table with a group of men yesterday at a local social club we all belong to. Jim was also present and approached Jerry, requesting a private conversation. Jerry initially ignored him, but Jim persisted, even to the point of tears, pleading with Jerry in desperation. Based on the reports, Jerry responded to Jim by telling him to go away and warned him that staying out of sight would be in his best interest, or else he'd face consequences. Learning about this frightened me because Jerry has never displayed any meanness or violence before. I'm worried that something might have shifted in him mentally, as he's no longer the kind and loving man I've known for 3 decades. At this point, I'm complying with Jerry's wishes and assured him that I'll be here when he's ready to have a conversation. I'm considering finding a part-time job to keep myself occupied, since there isn't much for me to do all day now that Jerry has taken over most of the household tasks. That's all I have to share for now. I'll provide another update if anything noteworthy occurs. Thank you for your well wishes and blessings. Final update. I wanted to return and provide an update on my current situation. I believe it's the right thing to do given all the valuable feedback I've received over the past year. My circumstances have taken a turn for the worse. Jerry and I are now officially divorced, and I find myself completely alone. As I mentioned in my previous update, we were living separately under the same roof, and I was doing everything in my power to reconcile. We carried on this way for 2 months, and during that time, I began to believe that things were improving. Then, one day, Jerry approached me with a request to talk. At this point, the anger had subsided, and he appeared solemn and sad. What he conveyed to me next shattered my spirit. He disclosed that he no longer had romantic feelings for me and desired a divorce. He also expressed his regret for the challenging behavior he exhibited in the past few months. I pleaded and implored him for several days, but his decision remained unwavering. He elaborated that he couldn't erase the memories of my infidelity and deception, particularly concerning me and Jim. Following this, he informed me that he had requested a transfer to the Tampa office and would be relocating closer to his parents, Sarasota, our daughter, Orlando, and son, Atlanta. This news left me utterly devastated. To cope with this situation, I've been attending therapy sessions 3 times a week, and it has been beneficial. My therapist explained that the discovery of the affair has fundamentally altered my husband, and he is no longer the same person. He now sees me through a different lens. She advised me to grieve this loss as if Jerry had passed away because the man I loved has forever changed and cannot be brought back. While my children were initially angry with me, they are now deeply saddened by our divorce. They had hoped that their father would eventually calm down and reconcile with me. Both of them have come home to visit and made efforts to facilitate reconciliation. But Jerry had already made up his mind. My parents are feeling nothing but sadness and despair due to this situation. As mentioned earlier, Jerry was like a son to them, and he provided a lot of support. I've been trying to persuade them to move to Florida, but they are resistant to the idea. They insist on staying in our hometown, even though most of their friends have passed away. I'll continue to work on them because living closer to my kids and Jerry would make me feel much better. On a positive note, I'm planning to visit my son in Atlanta and my daughter in Orlando during the holidays, which will keep me away for 2 months. While I'm there, I had also planned to visit my former in-laws in Sarasota. Surprisingly, when Jerry learned about my trip, he called and invited me to stay at his new place outside Tampa. I immediately accepted his offer. I hope that this might be an opportunity for us to reconcile. I believe he still loves me and misses me greatly, as both my daughter and son have told me. I think he needed to distance himself from this town and the painful memories, and his affair and divorce were a way of punishing me. Now that he's done that, I believe he realizes that our love is enduring, and we are meant to be together. Regarding Jim and Susie, they have also divorced. I heard that Susie was quite upset about Jerry's move, as they had become close, and he had supported her through her divorce. She insists they were just friends, and Jerry has never admitted to anything, but I've heard they had a passionate affair for several months before Jerry relocated. She has already visited him in Florida, and this really pains me deeply. If having an affair was what Jerry needed to work through his feelings and find healing, I suppose I can accept it. I'm burdened with immense regret for my foolish affair, and feel incredibly foolish for not getting rid of that diary when I had the chance nearly 29 years ago. I even considered shredding it back then, but ultimately chose to keep it, shaking my head and kicking myself for that decision. All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. Story 2. In July, my wife, 34F, went on a quick work trip from Thursday to Saturday morning. On the same Saturday evening, we attended my stepdad's birthday dinner, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The following Sunday, we carried on with our usual routine, doing some grocery shopping, errands, and preparing for the work week. Once the work week started on Monday, everything appeared normal. We exchanged our usual texts during the day. However, on my way home from work, she texted me about having a potential yeast infection and mentioned she was going to get it checked out. I sympathized, making a lighthearted remark like, Hopefully it's not an STD, LOL. She responded with a laugh, and that seemed to be the end of it. A few hours later, before I had a chance to see her, she sent another text saying, "Your comment earlier about it being an STD was weird. You don't think I'm cheating on you, do you?" I chuckled and replied, "No lol." But her comment did strike me as odd. At the time, I brushed it off, not giving it much thought, but in hindsight, this was the first red flag. 2 days passed, and she informed me that her condition had worsened, and she needed to go back to the doctor. I felt sympathy for her, knowing she had experienced mild discomfort like this before, but never to this extent. When she returned from her second doctor's visit, she said she now had thrush, in addition to a severe yeast infection. I remember wondering what thrush was, and she explained that it's a throat infection. In a somewhat joking manner, I told her to stay away from me if she was sick, as I didn't want to catch anything. Looking back, all of these events marked the second red flag. Over the next couple of days, including the weekend, she was mostly confined to bed due to her illness. She called in sick to work, but managed some tasks from home. During that time, I kept my distance, watching her from afar while she rested in bed or on the couch, feeling sorry for her condition. She was clearly unwell, and there wasn't much I could do. As she started to recover during the following week, I began to notice that something was amiss with her. One day I came home from work, and she was sitting on the couch crying. I inquired about what was bothering her, and she mentioned that she intended to start seeing a counselor. This puzzled me a bit, and I asked if I should go with her, or if I needed to seek counseling as well. She declined, explaining that she hadn't been feeling herself and needed to talk to someone. I agreed, and this marked the third red flag. A few days later, after I had just finished showering, I found her sitting on the bed, crying once more. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Is this the best life has to offer? Is this what we want? Is it what you want? What do I want? Is there more to life than this?" I was taken aback for a moment as it took some time to grasp the meaning of her questions. I didn't quite know how to respond, so I asked her to clarify. She simply replied with, "Never mind," and I can't recall what happened afterward. Then, on August 14th at 9 p.m., as we were getting ready for bed, she began crying once again. I asked her what was troubling her, and her tears intensified. I reassured her, saying that I knew something had been bothering her over the past few weeks, and that whatever it was, we would work through it together because I loved her. She responded with, "I can't tell you. If I do, you won't want to work it out." In that moment, I felt a surge of nervousness or adrenaline in my stomach, and I pleaded with her, saying, "Please tell me." Then she dropped a bombshell on me, saying, "I had a one-night stand." At that moment, all the warning signs, all the little things that had been happening in the preceding weeks, suddenly fell into place, like pieces of a big puzzle coming together. Here's the story. After finishing her work for the day, she decided to stop by a bar for a drink before returning to her hotel. She sent me a picture of the beer she was having, and I responded with the usual, "Love you, good night." While she was at the bar, she struck up a conversation with a guy who happened to share my name, of all things. They ended up chatting all night, having a few more drinks, and eventually left the bar around 2 a.m. They went to his place where she did BJ, and then they had unprotected intercourse. I asked her if he finished inside, and she claimed he didn't, saying he pulled out and did it on her stomach. But I couldn't be certain. It turns out he had HSV and transmitted it to her. What she initially thought was a yeast infection and thrush in her throat was actually an HSV outbreak. I distinctly remember feeling completely heartbroken, devastated, shocked, and in utter disbelief when she disclosed all these details to me. I struggled for months after what we refer to as D-Day, Discovery Day. It affected me to the extent that I had to take medication for a while to stabilize myself. I knew something was physically wrong because I felt terrible all the time. And as it turned out, my blood pressure had soared to 149/127. No wonder I felt so awful. To provide some context, I would say we had a strong marriage. We were often regarded as the favorite couple by everyone, and even my father likened us to Ken and Barbie. I'm sharing this to emphasize that we weren't a dysfunctional couple with glaring and obvious marital problems. However, what transpired challenged that perception. When I confided in some of my closest friends and family, they all reacted with wide-heaved astonishment and the same, "Are you serious?" response. It was a total shock not only to me but to everyone who knew us. She's been seeing a counselor throughout this entire period, delving deep into every aspect of what happened. The reasons, the methods, the details. All of it. She's confessed to me that she doesn't know why. Out of all the times she's been approached by guys, she gave in this time. However, in the grand scheme of things, the reason doesn't matter much because what's done is done. And it takes just one incident to bring a marriage crashing down. She did mention that he made her feel desired, gave her attention, apparently boosted her self-esteem by calling her beautiful. If that was all it took, she has her own issues to confront. And unfortunately, she wasn't mature enough to address them or acknowledge that something was seriously wrong before it was too late. I acknowledge that it takes two to create a problem, and I played a part in all of this. Still, I can't accept responsibility for her actions, the way she treated me, herself, our marriage, and the harm she caused. However, I can recognize where I could have been a better husband. I should have been more attentive, more engaged, essentially more of whatever she felt she needed. These are lessons I've learned. It's been over a year and a half, and we're separated, but this remains a significant obstacle in my life. I've chosen to move away from her in our marriage, and it's a struggle because this was never what I wanted. She wants to stay together and work things out, but for me, the damage is too extensive. Over the past year and a half, I believe she has made genuine efforts to make amends. But with the STD involved, I simply can't. Knowing all the details of what transpired, I just can't bring myself to do it. And when I say I can't, I'm essentially saying I choose not to. The level of disrespect is too profound, the humiliation too great, and the act itself was entirely uncalled for and selfish. It's disheartening because she realizes she ruined what was once a perfectly normal marriage, and wishes she could turn back time and have a do-over. However, she made a series of choices that night, each one leading her down that regrettable path. I doubt I'll ever comprehend how she could leave the bar with him, get into his car, drive with him, arrive at his house, go inside,